It really works.
It's magic.
All right, good evening, everyone. We have this workshop this evening, and I would like to introduce Eileen King. She is from Maine School Management Association, in particular Maine School Board Association, here to walk us through some of the foundational knowledge that we need to proceed the best possible way. So thank you, Eileen, for being here tonight.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for, first of all, for serving on your school board. It's an incredibly important job to support the education of the children in your community, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of commitment, and it's so important, and I'm so thrilled that you folks have chosen to take on this. It's a vocation, and it's a labor of love, but at the end of the day, it's what's best for kids, so thank you very much. We have a lot to do tonight. I have my usual hour-and-a-half presentation that I know I only have about 40 minutes to do it in, so I was practicing talking really fast today. So I'm not going to go through this whole packet, and also we know that you have some questions about superintendent search, so I have some information to hand out to you. I've offered Karen to come back because I'm going to skim across a lot of important stuff, both on school board training and conducting superintendent searches. Usually those are kind of done in 2 different nights, but I think right now time is of the essence, and you've kind of got me as a captured audience, so I'll do the best that I can. Just about MSMA, I am representing Maine School Board Association, and our role is completely to support you as school board members, provide professional training, professional development, whether it's customized professional development, whether it's trainings that we offer throughout the state. We support every school board and every school board member in the state of Maine. Daily phone calls come in all the time. Questions about procedures, processes, just you pick up the phone, and Steve Bailey is the Executive Director of the Maine School Management Association. I'm the Deputy Executive Director, and we are here to serve you and to help you become the most effective and efficient school board and help you serve the children the best way that you can. So that's where we're coming from, and certainly there's some brochures on the left side of your packet that I'm not going to go through tonight, but certainly it does summarize some of the work that we do for you and some of the other things that goes on at MSMA. The other thing, so I break the packet down into just 2 sides. We have the left side and the right side. At the very, very bottom of your left side, there is a PowerPoint handout so that I'm going to be speaking from for most of the night. On the right side are your table of contents, and it really has all of the policies. Usually what I do is I'll stop and go through and review the policies with you that you have, but because we don't have the time for me to really do that, they are referred to in this handout. Policies, we have handouts on how to be an effective school board member. We have handouts on the use of social media. We have handouts on executive session, how to go into executive session. We have handouts on what items are confidential. We have a ton of information that I hope you will find useful, and I hope you can take some time to review because that will help you proceed in the best manner possible. I'm going to do the best job I can to cover kind of the highlights. So right now, the purpose of the workshop is to give you an orientation for new members as well as veteran members. And I understand that I think there are more new members than veteran members right now. Okay.
Yes.
This is kind of a first kind of flyby professional development. As I said, usually this takes about an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm going to kind of cover some of the hot topics and kind of start to maybe get your feet under you, and once again make a connection with you folks that if you ever have any questions, you know how to get in touch with me. No question is too small. We'd rather have you ask a question that might be a very minor question, but we'd rather have you have the accurate information and good information to help you move forward and make good decisions.
Last question.
Do you recommend that goes through the chair to you or any member calling?
Always recommend the chair, or the question can go to the chair, or let the chair know that you are calling.
Yeah.
Just so you keep that line of communication. And because there are thousands and thousands of school board members, it's easier if we usually have the chair or the vice chair reach out to talk to us. But you certainly, if you have a question that you want to ask, you might want to talk to your chair or your vice chair if your chair is not around. All communication usually should go through the chair of the school board, whether it's talking to the superintendent, but I'll get to the role of the board chair in a minute. I'm jumping ahead already. I'm already on page 4. I'm really good. So, once again, there are a couple of things I'm going to point out tonight that you may philosophically not agree with, but they are in statute, and I just want to make sure that you understand. On page 2, the first slide, veteran and new board members face the same three realities. They campaign as individuals, but you serve as a member of a team. So you all come to this board with your own ideas, your own experiences, and when you get here, as I say, there's no I in team. You need to work together as a team for the good of the students in your district. You have no authority as individuals, only as a board, and that's really hard for John Q. Public to understand. They see you at the store, they see you at a gathering, and they say, oh, Pamela, can I talk to you about something? And they go into school business. And as an individual, you have absolutely no authority. The only time you have authority is in the boardroom. So when you're approached somewhere with, I've got a question about this, or I have a problem with this, your best answer is say, thank you very much, and please make sure you call the superintendent and make sure that she knows about that. So you have to understand clearly, and it's hard because as much as you might understand you have no authority, if you say something like, I'll look into that, you're now taking a step into authority, you're taking a step into taking care of something. So your best answer is to say, thank you for bringing that to my attention, I'll bring it to the superintendent's attention, or I'll bring it to the board chair's attention. So that's a hard thing for people that aren't on the board to understand, that you have no authority as an individual outside of the boardroom. As I said, it's hard for the public to understand that, because when they speak to you, they're speaking to you as a board member. If they email you or any other kind of social media, they're doing it, they see you as a board member, and the only time you have authority is in the boardroom. So that's something that, yep.
Sorry, I just heard two different things there. So if somebody says in the grocery store they have an issue, would we recommend they bring it to the superintendent, or we bring it?
I would hope that you would listen, and
Right,
then you would,
absolutely.
instead of saying, I'll take care of that, or I'll look into that, I would then say, I'd be happy to bring to the, you ought to actually say, have you spoken to the superintendent? Have
Right,
you talked
okay,
to the,
that's what-
you want to do the lowest common denominator.
Right.
Did you talk to the teacher? Did you talk to the principal? Did you talk to the
Right, chain of
superintendent?
commands, yep.
And if they say no, I then would say, I'd be happy to bring this to the superintendent's attention.
Okay.
Because if the superintendent doesn't know that something's
Right.
going on, they can't fix it. So when you have that, just appreciate the fact that they came to you, and then ask if they brought it, forward in any of those ways, because you do want to start with the classroom teacher and
Right.
then the principal, and then, but if they say, no, I haven't, I don't want to, for whatever reason, then I will make sure that the superintendent is aware of this, so they can look into that.
'Cause
Thank you for
that's-
clarifying that.
That happens very often.
Yeah.
They haven't
thank you for
talked to
clarifying
anybody
that.
yet.
Well, that's going to get to page on dealing with complaints, but see, and thank you for clarifying that. And then the other thing is the success of a board member is tied to the success of the board. So once again, is working together as a team. There are going to be times you're going to have to agree to disagree. There are times that things that you feel strongly about will maybe not go forward in a motion. And at that point, if you have an issue or an item that you felt should have moved forward in a motion, it did not move forward in the motion, the best thing you can do is to say, okay, how do I make this decision successful? So your job is to take the board's decision, regardless of how you feel about it. If it's something that you didn't support, then your job is to support that decision and do everything you can to make that decision successful. So that's where the success of the board is tied to the individual members. So school committees are governing bodies per statute in the state of Maine. Their statutory powers and duties are derived from the Maine Supreme Court. And I'm going to read something, and once again, this is probably where I have the most debate when I do these workshops. And this is, a school board is defined by statute as the governing body with statutory powers and duties for school administrative units. The Maine Supreme Court has stated that school boards may exercise those powers confirmed on them by statute. The school committee acts as a public board. It in no sense represents the town, and that's a hard sticking point for many board members. Its members are chosen by the voters of the town, but after election, they are public officers deriving their authority from the law and responsible to the state for the good faith and rectitude of their acts. That is outlined in the Supreme Court. Katie has a copy of this. If you have the blue book, it refers to the statute and case law in which that provision is defined in state law. This is a difficult concept sometimes for many board members because they will see that their constituents voted them to go in to take care of a certain situation. I'm going to give you an example of a law that recently passed. It was what I call the immunization law. In the last session, the change in the immunization law was to do away with two of the provisions that would allow a student to come in without immunization be due to philosophical or religious concerns. That is no longer able. That as of September 2021, that is no longer allowable per school law. So you're in a situation now where your elected officials with statutory powers derived from the Maine Supreme Court, and you're now required to follow state law on all of the legislation and statutes regarding the education program in your district. So when I refer to the immunization law, you're going to have constituents that firmly disagree with that, but your role is to support that, because if you don't, then you're breaking the law. So I wanted to come up with a clear-cut example of you're now serving the children in the District of Auburn, and you're now serving them based on school law and statute. And so when you come together, your job now is to serve the children and the educators and the educational community in your community based on school law and statute, not based on what your neighbor wants. It's a really, really hard concept to grasp. It's a really hard concept to live by, and I have a lot of board members that disagree with me, which is why I always bring a copy of the Maine the Supreme Court statute with me, because I just want to make sure that people understand that that's how you're expected to move forward. And I'll pause for a minute. Okay. So the last slide on page 2 is effective school boards understand they have no authority except when they're acting as part of the majority of the board, and when the board, or when the board votes by delegates to delegate authority. So if you were chosen, for example, to serve on the negotiations committee, the board will vote to delegate authority for you to move forward to represent that board, to represent the board in that role. So other than that, you have no role, no authority as an individual. So it is when the board votes to give you that authority. And that would be, an example would be moving into negotiations. The school board, responsibilities of school board and superintendent. You do have a policy on this. Right now, handout number 1 and I think number 3, I just want to refer to them. And number 4, I'm not going to go through them right now because I want to make sure that we, get through some of these slides. But obviously, you select the superintendent, you set policy, you adopt your budget, and you act as a Court of Appeals, and I will explain the Court of Appeals section a little bit further. Selection of the superintendent, you're at the eve of one of the most important decisions you'll make as a school board is selecting your new superintendent. And then adopting policy is incredibly important because policy is what I call the handbook. If you look at you buy a new or owner's manual. I used to call it the rules of the game, and someone said education's not a game, so now I changed my lingo. But so if you buy a new car, you have that great big thick owner's manual on your new car and how to use your car, or or just your roadmap and your journey. Your policies really define how you do your business, and how you react to situations, and how you conduct yourselves, and how you expect your administrators to conduct themselves. And your policies are very, very important. They take several meetings. Most districts take 2 meetings to adopt them. There are usually meetings with administrative teams. They're usually presented to the teachers so that they can see what policies are being discussed. But it's very important that once those policies are adopted, you follow them in full. You don't follow some of them some of the time. You don't follow one of them part way, because a policy really does tell you how you move forward and how you conduct yourselves as a school district. The times that I find that school boards and superintendents get into trouble is when they'll say, well, I'll follow part of that policy, but not the whole one. So it's really important that when you set policy, you understand that you're establishing the rules and the regulations and the standards of operating procedures for your district. I went through your policy manual today, and it's in excellent, excellent condition. So there's not much work other than watching the new laws and legislations that come out and making sure that your policies are comparable. And if they aren't, then calling us to ask us for any updated policies that we have. That's one of the services we do offer for school boards for free, is to always have policies available for you to request. Your board chair might have a conversation, and we say, well, let's see if we have a policy, let's see how updated it is. So that's something that, that we do offer. On the last one, Court of Appeals, if you go down to the next slide, you have 3 primary functions, and I'll go back up to the superintendent's role in a minute. Your legislative, your quasi-judicial, and your executive. And legislative is, once again, adopting policy, you're providing for orderly operations, and you exercise due diligence. Once again, doing your homework before you come to board meetings, reading your minutes before you come to board meetings, being aware of what you're going to be talking about. If you have questions, making sure you call the superintendent, just kind of saying, I'm just not sure, you know, what is a little bit of the background for this. The superintendent might just, you know, restate conversation that the board may have had earlier, just to make sure that you understand what you're talking about. Quasi-judicial would deal with a dismissal situation, a student expulsion, proceeding of records, and anything that you do in this situation can be subject to the Court of Appeals. But really, only 2 places I really see the quasi-judicial would be for a dismissal hearing or suspension or expulsion hearing, and mostly expulsion hearing. In those situations, the board needs to understand that your superintendent and the board chair will work very closely in those situations. Your board chair will have significantly more information than the rest of the board will have, because your superintendent will need to keep the board chair up to snuff on what's going on, why we're doing this, why we're moving forward, exactly what happened, and who did what. The rest of you will not be involved in that information. You will have probably a general knowledge that will be going into an expulsion hearing, or will be going into an executive session for a dismissal hearing, but you need to be left impartial, because you become the jury. And we can't give you any more information that would sway you or would give you an opportunity to maybe make a decision ahead of time. And I know it's hard, because I know out in the community you're probably going to hear bits and pieces of maybe what's going on. But when you're in one of those quasi-judicial situations, you're going to be going in, you'll be represented by your attorney, the other individual will be represented by their attorney, you'll be hearing the facts of the case, and then you'll be having to make a decision. So that's why we keep the boards, or we recommend to your superintendent and your board chair that the board chair will work with the superintendent to go through the issue and the incident and the circumstances, but the rest of you will have very little knowledge, because we want to make sure that you're impartial to the situation, and that you make your decision based on the facts that you hear at the hearing, not the facts that you may have heard in bits and pieces outside of that. So that's a really important role for you, and I hope that doesn't happen. Executive, obviously your authority to enter into a contract, approve purchases, and employ persons. Once again, the superintendent will nominate, will recommend a nomination, will recommend a person to be employed. You're the final vote that nominates. So that's the only way you can hire someone, is that the superintendent will bring that name to the boardroom to recommend them, and then you will nominate them. If the superintendent does not recommend, that employee does not get, that individual does not get hired. You have to have that recommend, nominate, and then the superintendent then offers the contract. And those are the 3 steps to hiring individuals. You delegate authority to the superintendent to carry out functions, and your budget establishes spending categories, and the board will vote in the budget. And once again, when I say you adopt a budget, obviously there's a lot of people working on developing that budget behind the scenes. So you don't actually have your hands on developing the budget. You do have your brains on asking questions about the budget, and looking at the budget, and then actually, when the final budget is presented, voting on that budget. So that's kind of the role of the board in the budget process. The school superintendent, school committee superintendent relationship, on page 3, I'm sorry, on the right side of your packet, handout 3, And this is your policy. So this is what you have decided that your school board superintendent relationship is going to be. So here you have your kind of owner's manual to being a new board member on, and I'm going to recognize the superintendent as the educational leader, provide the direction for the superintendent through written policies, objectives, and goals, give the superintendent full administrative authority. So your job is to ensure that the schools are well managed. The superintendent's job is to manage the schools. And that's pretty clear-cut delineation. Your job is to ensure that the schools are well managed. The superintendent's job is to manage the schools. You obviously hold all school committee meetings in the presence of the superintendent, except as otherwise permitted by law. Refer complaints, requests to the superintendent. Once again, if your superintendent doesn't know that there's been a complaint, she can't look into it. And that's a frustration on many superintendents and administrators, that they can't solve issues in a vacuum, and they can't solve issues without data and fact. And so we really need to make sure that you have an open line of communication and allow your superintendent and your assistant superintendent to look into issues that have been brought before you. Always remember there might be another side to the story as well. And then evaluate the superintendent and provide opportunities for the superintendent to share his or her perceptions. And then we can do I have a whole another, not workshop, but I have a whole nother set of information on conducting superintendent evaluations and conducting board evaluations, conducting evaluations on yourself and setting goals based on those evaluations. So that's something that we certainly could support you with as we move forward. One of the things I like to bring out is the Code of Ethics. On the right side of your packet, number 5, you have your Code of Ethics. Once again, this is your policy. And it's really important, I feel, that every year that the school board pulls out their school board Code of Ethics and they review them. Once again, this is your owner's manual for being a board member. There are some districts that go as far as reviewing them in the beginning, the first meeting of the year, and then signing them and saying, I'm committed to following this Code of Ethics. That has been developed by your board, by a previous board. And in going back about policy, if there are policies that you don't like, there is a way to change them. So if you have a policy that you're really struggling with, or you think needs updating, there's a way to do that. But until you do that, you need to follow the policy that has been established by a prior board. But this is your Code of Ethics. I'm not going to read through this. One of the ones that's important to me is I will think of children first and base my decision on how they will affect children, their education, their training. I will make no disparaging remarks in or out of school committee meetings. Once again, you have no legal authority. My responsibility is not to operate the schools, but to see they're well operated. These are all your Code of Ethics. So especially new board members, I'd certainly take time to please go through this to really understand what you will be held accountable to and how your board chair will expect you to move forward as a board member. If you have questions about these, please let me know. These were adopted these were adopted in 1994, 84, and then 94, and then reviewed in 2008. One of the things we do is we update policies and Code of Ethics quite often. So that's something that Katie could certainly look to see if there's been an update. I don't think there has been. I think this is the one that we've been using for a while. Ethics and practice represent, and I watch my time here, Katie, 20 of you. So I've gone over ethics. I'm realizing I'm getting duties of the chair. Once again, assist the superintendent in the preparation of meeting agendas, chairs the school committee meetings, assists in setting the schedule for meetings, and is the official spokesperson for the board, unless otherwise agreed. There are some board chairs that aren't comfortable in that role, but right now that is the way most boards function, is that the chair is the spokesman of the board and represents the entire board when speaking, not their personal agenda or not their personal decision. And the board chair works for you. The board chair also has a difficult job of bringing all of you together because you all ran individually. Once again, you have your own philosophies and your own perceptions of education and educational programs and your own perceptions of what's effective. And her job is to pull you all together so you're a member of a functioning team. And that is going to take some time as you get to know each other and as you get to understand what your role as school members are. So I just wanted to point out the duties of the chair, and I did want to make sure that you knew that when you get to that quasi-judicial situation, that your board member, 9 times out of 10, always has a lot more information on some of the nitty-gritty things, just because your superintendent will be running things by your board chair just to keep them in the loop, and then you folks will decide how to disseminate that information. Most common mistakes you can make is the not understanding the chair's role, allowing surprises. If you know something's going on and you know someone might be coming to a meeting, or you just know there's some undercurrent, pick up the phone and let people know so they can be prepared for someone and for questions. Not requiring recognition prior to speaking. If someone's going to speak, I'm sure you do this, but the recognition is required. Forgetting to demand proper respect and protocol by all board members at time, and that's the board chair is to really, make you accountable to that role, your code of ethics. And if you're not following that code of ethics, it's your board chair to pick up the phone and say, what do we need to do to support you better? How can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? This is our code of ethics. This is how you need to move forward. And then forgetting that the conduct of the board sends messages to during the board meeting sent to the public, and it sends messages to your staff. And what we find is that effective boards that communicate well, that can agree to disagree, that support the board's final decision, that effective collaboration and communication trickles down into your schools. And you see that in your schools. When you have a board that's dysfunctional, that doesn't agree, that is argumentative, that will disparage other people, will have private meetings outside, and you have that disjointed feeling, then you find that disjointed feeling also trickles down into your school. So it's really important for you to have a board climate that works well, that's supportive, and that's efficient, because that will send a message to your staff and your administrators that business is being conducted, it's being conducted well, it's being conducted in a thoughtful way, and therefore there's no concern about maybe a disgruntled board or a fractured board. So it's very important. The other thing is how you conduct yourselves in a public meeting does send a message to the parents of the children that you're serving. Because at the end of the day, you are still serving the children of Auburn. And so I think parents, the phone calls that I get quite often are from parents that are just concerned about the tone at the board meeting and how that might impact what's going on in the school. So I just wanted to point that out. And also, it provides trust within the community. How you conduct yourself in your business in the public eye will go a long way in determining the support the community will give to you folks. So I want to move on to email. I always say, just don't use it. Email is really efficient. I know it's an easy way to get information out. I would recommend that you only use it when there's a change in venue, that the meeting was going to be held at 6 o'clock in this building and it's being moved to another. But please don't use it to conduct board business in any way, shape, or form. Any discussion via email of board business, and if people have the perception that's being done, it can be accessed for the Freedom of Access of Information Act. Anything so all your emails could be subpoenaed. So it's just safe not to use email to conduct, and nor should board business be conducted outside of the boardroom. It should not be conducted to get a decision ahead of time. It should not be sent out to 3 people saying, how are you voting on item number 5? That is taboo. That should not happen. The safest thing is just not to use email unless you're going to be using it for what I call directory information. We're going to be meeting here at 5 o'clock, or we're going to have a workshop, or we're going to have a special meeting on Saturday, or just who, what, when, not even who, where and when would be the safest way to use email right now. The other thing is with social media is that, once again, when you are on social media, if you're on Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, when you're on there, you're seen as a member of the board, even if it's your personal page, even if it's something that, you just have to understand whatever you say about school business will be seen coming from a board member. So it's my strong recommendation is not to use social media to discuss school business in any way, shape, or form. Now, I had a question once, what if I went to a concert that was wonderful? Then yes, absolutely, it just came back, especially if your child's in it, just came back. I had a great concert, at the school, and that, those types of things are appropriate. But to get into discussion with individuals about school business, once again, Hannaford, social media, email is just not appropriate and should not take place. So I just want to make sure I point that out. I also gave you quite a few guidelines on social media that you can review at your discretion. Just remember that anything you put down in writing and send doesn't get deleted. Even if you delete it, it lives out there somewhere and can be scooped up if at some time if needed. On page,
Even texting.
thank you.
Watch what you're texting.
Yes.
Yeah. So often I recommend, if you have a question, just pick up the, right, call me. You'll have my cell phone, you have my direct, you just call and say, I need to talk to you. So, much better than.
Or you can
usually
text and
you
say,
don't
I
wanna
need to
go-
talk to you.
Yeah, and I've had those. Call me now, please, thank you. That's fine. I don't mind. And if you're texting me, I often will say, I'm going to call you now. Yeah. Yeah.
I do that sometimes with board members. I'll just say, may I call you? Do you have a minute for a phone
Yes.
call? And they'll say, I'm in a meeting. Can I call you at my lunch break at 12:30? And that's how we kind of communicate. But I will not talk about any school board business over social media or over any kind of technology. I just like to have a person-to-person phone call with that, because quite often you might be talking about a situation that could be identifiable later on, and you certainly wouldn't want those subpoenaed. So on page 7 in the middle, we talk about confidentiality. Confidentiality is a huge part of your role. All employment matters, applicants, interviews, reference information remains confidential forever and ever and ever. I mean, even if you hire someone today and 10 years later, you're still on the board and that person applies for something again, you can't even say that person applied for something a few years ago. Executive session. Notes may not be taken, and all information is confidential during executive session. And then also the quasi-judicial matters, when you go in and you're acting as part of a jury, that remains confidential as well. So those areas, confidentiality is absolutely crucial, especially when you go into executive session, that whatever is discussed in executive session has to stay there. You cannot take notes. There are no minutes kept during executive session. So executive session, once again, that's once again controlled by statute. Quite often, items that can be discussed are employment, appointment, assignment, duties, promotion, demotion. I'm not going to go through all of this, but resignation, any legal discussion, legal advice from your attorney can be included. The next page, expulsion or suspension, condition or acquisition of or use of real property, and general budget, but matters should not be discussed. So you cannot go in to executive session to discuss if you have to do a RIF, who would be RIFed. That does not happen in executive session. It starts with a public motion. It passed a motion with recorded 3/5 votes of the members present, not of the entire board. And you have to state the precise nature of business in a motion, including a citation of the statute. I have included that in this packet. So you have to align your reason to go into executive session with a citation from a statute. Once you're in executive session, you are not to discuss any other item. You can't say, oh, by the way, while we're in executive session. What you technically should do is if you have several items that you have to discuss in executive session, I would have 3 executive sessions stated in the agenda. I would go in for one for purpose of personnel. Brian's got it. I would conduct the business. I would go back out. I would go back in for the disposition of real property. I'd go back out, and I'd go back in for advice from legal counsel. Some districts will have all 3 of them, and then we'll go in all under one umbrella. I think it's more transparent, and it's cleaner for you to go in and out under each one. And it shows that you were paying due diligence to not having any other conversations. It is the board's chair to stop any conversation. It's very hard for the superintendent to say to their boss, you can't do that. although I know a lot of superintendents tend to have to do that, but it is the board's chair to make sure that executive sessions are followed to the letter of the law, and that no items are discussed. And the other thing I want to talk about are the meetings after the meetings. Usually as you all leave meetings, and some boards tend to kind of, dilly-dally and talk, you can't have meetings after the meetings. You can't have a quorum outside talking about what you just discussed. Your only authority is in the boardroom, and you shouldn't be aligning after the meeting to talk about what did or did not happen. So I think I've gone through the executive session. Public concerns and complaints should be sought at the lowest possible resolution. If not, you appeal it to the next level. And if that's not resolved, you appeal it to the superintendent. And if it's still unresolved, you can request the matter be placed on a school board agenda. That quite often would end up in an executive session. You would not be holding discussions about students or personnel in public session at all. I want to go down to page 9. In the handling of concerns, I think I've kind of answered that. And if once again, I addressed this earlier tonight on if you do have a concern, you ask if they've gone to the lowest common denominator, and then if they haven't, you offered to, bring it forward to the superintendent. Public participation at meetings, there's a new statute, and there's a sample policy in your packet. It's after number 15. And I know you already have a public participation meeting, but you are required to have public comment period, which most districts do. It's usually in the beginning. Some districts have sign-ups, so people, if they have public comment, they will sign up before, so you know who's going in who's interested in making public comment. But it is required right now to, and there is a sample policy in this packet. I just couldn't put my hands on it. And the end of the, go ahead, Kate.
I did see it. Yeah.
Okay. And the end of the hour and 15-minute presentation talks about 8 traits of effective school boards, and school boards' actions matter, trends from 4 studies. And I like this slide on page 10. Positive relationship between effective boardsmanship and student achievement. Responsible school governance, high student expectations, holds districts accountable, community engagement, and creates conditions for students and staff success. So I have given you a ton of information about your roles and responsibilities. I've only scratched the surface of those. And like I said, we can do a more thorough workshop. This workshop might spar some questions. We could certainly take those questions and certainly develop something more in depth for you. We could come back and do a kind of an advanced training workshop. You have a lot of information. You might want to take time and some of your board members to kind of review some of this information. One topic, what are the 8 traits of effective school boards, just reviewing them one night. I do also have a whole list of items that are confidential items. I do have, I heard Robert's rules. That's in here on handout number 6. We have the code ethics for board members. We have questions that board members should always ask. And then we also have Robert rules and the motions chart in the backs. I call this a placemat. I think this is something that would be really helpful for you to have at every board meeting, kind of as a placemat that kind of helps you kind of stay focused on what questions to ask. Also, what your code of ethics is right there, and then also Robert's rules motions chart, because not everyone has that in the top of their head, because it's not something a lot of people don't live in that world. So, and then also in your packet under around Appendix F on it's handout 10. I have school unit records designated as confidential by law under Maine statute, and it's more information you could possibly need, but just want to make sure that you had that made available to you. So.
And I did encourage them to read Section B, especially of our policy manual at this point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that Section B of your policy manual does define your roles as school board members. So, Madam Chair, would you like me to move into superintendent search?
Yes, please. Any questions on what she's
Please,
gone
please,
over?
text me and I'll call you. No.
Yeah, right.
If you have any questions, let Katie or Michelle know, or get in touch with me, to clarify anything. If you want to challenge something I said, please call me, and I'd be happy to give you more in-depth information about what I just shared with you. So now I'm going to pass out the superintendent search package that we do for districts. Once again, I know I have limited time here. In your packet, we just put together the typical packet, just introducing ourselves and talking about, are you hiring a new superintendent, and the general scope of work. I included 2 handouts on the right-hand side of your packet. One is a technical proposal for the Auburn School Department for superintendent searches, and then one is a cost proposal. And I think what I can do is walk through what the process could look like and point you to some materials here in your handouts. But I also think that this is such an important job ahead of you that trying to do service in 20 minutes is not fair for you at all. And I said to Karen when I came in that I'd be happy to come back and talk to you more in depth about the process and what the process looks like. So the technical proposal of superintendents, that I'm not going to go once again. If you look at the 3rd page in, we're going to talk. It talks about why hire MSMA or a other search firm to conduct your search. It introduces who we are, overview of superintendent searches, and the timeline. The proposed timeline is on page 9, and recent superintendent searches. And I think the timeline is what you're probably most interested in, if I'm not mistaken. And before we get to that, if you go to page 7 very quickly, just the overall services that we do. We do a phase 1, which is leadership profile development, where we will do a leadership profile based on information that we get through surveys that we will conduct in your community. We do candidate recruitment. So when you advertise, it goes through all of the state executive superintendent associations, and it goes on all of their state websites. It goes out nationally on School Spring, and it also goes to all the school boards associations nationally across the state. It also is advertised in depth in our own state across all of our organizations and educational organizations in our own state. It's posted on the MSMA website. It's posted on the MSA newsletter. So we have a constant list of going out. MSSA also has a newsletter. It also has positions, advertises positions. We advertise positions nationally for MSSA as well. So that's part of the job that would happen. Candidate screening, candidates would be screened, and we would help to identify semifinalists. We would help in the communication between your candidates. We would oversee that all the candidates' packets are complete, and that they have all the information that you wanted them to have. If they don't and they're within the timeline, we pick up the phone and say, you forgot to add your certificate, you forgot to add this, you forgot to add that, or would you make sure that you send, we only have 2 letters of recommendation, we need 3. So we make sure all that information is done for you. And we also conduct, as I said, we communicate with all of the candidates, and would also provide an orientation for the school board and the search committee. It's very important that you make sure that you don't break the laws. There's significant legal implications to conducting searches. So once you decide whether you have a search committee or a selection committee and who's going to be doing the interviews, we would come up and we usually do 2 workshops for you to make sure that you're well organized and you're well prepared to move forward. We provide sample questions for you based on your mission and strategic plan or your mission and vision document. We also help you organize and coordinate the interviews. We do not participate in the interviews, and we do not help select the finalists. We just make sure that you have the information you need to move forward in the best manner possible to find a candidate that matches what you're looking for. And so if you go to page 9, I just did this by months, but a search is going to take 3 months. A good search is going to take 3 months, possibly 4. The most important thing you need to do is when you make a decision on how you're going to do your search, is to make sure that you kind of start the planning backwards. When do we want to hire? When do we want to make this nomination? When do we want to do it? Middle of April? Do we want to do it beginning of May? And then in order to do it by that date, what do we have to do, and you plan backwards? Are we going to have community forums? Are we going to have surveys? What are we going to want as part of our search? How much do we want to do on our own? How much do we want the firm to do? Or the question right now, as you sit here, and many of you are new board members, wow, we're all new. Do we get our feet under us? Do we go for an interim for 1 year? And do we begin a thoughtful process maybe late next fall? Those are options that you can certainly think about. The cost proposal, which I'm sure is of interest to people, is on the second handout, and I'm going to go to the third page in. And this is where we will do as much as you want or as little as you want. You might have a really strong HR department that can pick up some of the roles and responsibilities. So we have committee workshops. Those committee workshops are the training workshops for your search committee to make sure that we give them all the legal ramifications. That's where we develop questions. We break into groups. We have a lot of input. We want the staff and the community to be very well represented, and we want input. And that can be done a different way, a couple of different ways. You can have some people serve on the search committee and the selection committee. You can also, we also do community forums. We come into your community and we'll conduct forums at several locations that will kind of seek out the traits and qualifications that you want in your superintendent. We do a survey. We can develop a survey questionnaire and coalition, and the survey would go out to every community member in the town, in Auburn, whether, there's parents, staff, community members, anyone, and it would be made available for anyone to fill out, and that will ask them and they usually get frustrated because they can't give us several answers. We really force them to think about what the traits and qualifications they want for their new superintendent. We would do the advertising, job description with samples. We do your brochure development. We would do the development of online and print advertising, and we do a graphic advertisement also to circulate to in-state and nationally. And then the application process would be the custom application materials, correspondence with candidates. We would have a secure web page creation and the redaction of important information, and we would upload that so that you wouldn't have paper copies floating around. You would do everything online as far as screening the applications. So the decisions you have to make is who's going to be on the interview committee, what kind of committee you're going to have, how many interviews are you going to have, is there going to be a site visit once you have a couple finalists, or are you going to have the finalists come to meet your staff here and have kind of an open time for that person to meet the staff and answer questions? If so, if you're going to do that, you need to let your candidates know up front that that's going to happen, because this whole process is highly confidential. The candidates will be interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them. Sometimes candidates don't want their districts to know that they're thinking about moving to another job because they don't want to send the wrong message. So when I left my job to go to MSMA, I was secure in knowing that that was a highly confidential process. I was incredibly happy where I was, but I was curious and I wanted to learn more about the job, and the more I learned, the more I realized this is the job I wanted to do. But I didn't want my former employer to know, because I was not unhappy, and I didn't want them to think I was going to be looking for every other job that came along the way. So you're going to have to let your candidates know at some point their position as being a finalist would need to be public, and so you have to make a lot of decisions, and that's where I think a more in-depth time to sit down and go through this with you, with maybe a draft timeline that I could put together if you were to post the position on February 2nd or on March 2nd. What would that look like? What would the timeline be for community workshops? What would the timeline be for the community surveys? Do you need community forums, or do you think you're going to get enough information from the surveys? A lot of districts think that they will get enough information from the surveys. And then from there, who's going to be on the selection committee, who's going to be on the interview committee, who's going to be selecting the candidates, the final candidates. Is that just going to be a board activity, or is that going to be a combined activity of staff and some board members? And then, how many interviews are you going to have? Are you going to have one interview where you're only going to have a couple board members participate in the first interview? That committee would send forward a slate of candidates for the board to interview, or you're going to have the board present at all the, so there's a lot of decisions, there's a lot of moving parts. The timeline is incredibly important. You need to have one person that's going to be connected to your search firm, because at the drop of a hat, if it's me, I'm going to need to talk to someone, I need to answer questions right away as I'm preparing materials. You need to make sure that everything is done legally, and that you have all your ducks in a row that way, and that you're not, charged with anything that is an improper handling of this process. So there's a lot of things to think about.
Any questions? Comments?
So just, I don't have my calculator, but what's the average cost of if we hire you to do a search with all these numbers added up?
With all of these things added up, I would say be close to, I'm going to say about 8.
8,000?
Yeah.
Okay.
With all of them added up.
And that's with
and
15
this is-
candidates?
Huh?
With about 15
15,
candidates?
right.
Okay.
And that's, 15's about, that's a good number these days. And not a lot of people are getting into the superintendency. Even in national, I did 2 big national searches last year, and we just don't have a lot of people getting into the superintendency. So 15 is a pretty strong number these days. It also depends on the district, on how well perceived the district is. As I said, the candidates are going to be interviewing you. So people
Right.
that are already thinking about it are looking at minutes, watching board meetings, kind of watching the news, seeing what's going on, because they want to make sure that this is going to be a good fit for them as well. So that's a very two-way street. But a lot of districts, I've done one for as few as 2,500. They didn't feel they needed the forums. They felt that the survey would get the information out, the information they wanted out. And so one district said, well, we've got a good HR, we'll handle the applications ourselves. So I don't want to say you have to choose everything, because that's,
Right, but for average, it's about
Average,
8,000.
right, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, Eileen.
Did you understand?
That was a lot to take in.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to call this December 18th, 2019 School Committee meeting to order. Could I ask you to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's start with introductions, please. Can we start down here on my right?
Good evening, David Simpson. I'm an at-large person.
Brian Belknap, Ward 4.
Pamela Hart, Ward 2.
Karen Matthew, Ward 3.
Katie Grundon, Superintendent.
Faith Fontaine at large.
Dan Poisson, Ward 5.
Brian Carrier, Mayor's Representative.
Michelle McClellan, Assistant Superintendent.
Adam Hansen, Business Manager.
Emma Sampson, Student Representative.
All right, everyone. Let's begin with communications. You have
Several. Yes. So I want to start with that we received in the mail that we have an AP recognition. So if you want to hold that up. Yeah. So we were pleased to report that the AP District Honor Roll recognizes school districts committed to increasing access to AP for underrepresented students while simultaneously maintaining or increasing the percentage of students earning AP exam scores of 3 or higher. AP District Honor Roll recipients are committed to expanding the availability of AP courses among prepared and motivated students of all backgrounds. So we are one of 3 schools in Maine to receive this year, and so it's very exciting. This will be hanging in EL and at Auburn Middle School as well. Val Ackley is part-time instructional coach for the Office of Learning and Teaching, as well as our gifted and talented teacher at Edward Little, and also offering consulting at Auburn Middle School. And last year, what we believe and we know, we talked a lot about how to raise our AP participation. And so last year we paid 50% of the exams. This year we're paying 100% of the exams using Title IV grant funds. This year we have 98% AP exam students participating in AP exams. So that's huge. We got pushed hard on, we got to improve our niche, our great schools, and this is beginning. So the good work we did to plan to raise those, we're very proud of. So you should feel good about that, and that will be hanging up. So I want to make sure. The other great news is Lisa Rodriguez here from Share Center, and I want her to come up to the mic. So she had some great news, and Roz Walton, our executive assistant, helped support. I think all of them work. I think of them work. Yeah. So jump in though. So Lisa, tell them the great news. She does a fantastic job coordinating our Share Center. So Lisa.
I hope that everyone knows what Share Center actually is. We are established through the Auburn School Department, but we're actually a self-funded nonprofit that takes in donations from area businesses to help support our environment, education, and economy. So one of the things that we do being self-funded, we raise our funds through memberships and fundraisers. I have been director since April of 2017, and there's been a huge need for a vehicle, a vehicle to transport material, to pick up material. Many times we are made aware of a donation, but it's in the 11th hour. Businesses want to remove items, still valuable items from their businesses, but don't know where to go. And so they contact us, and we just many times have not had the ability to go pick up these still great items. Well, with the help of Roz and Adam, we put together we wrote a grant to the Stephen King Foundation, the Stephen and Tabitha King Foundation, and we just received the check 2 days ago for $40,000.
Wow.
With these funds, we'll be able to purchase a brand new 15-foot box truck with a lift gate, and we'll be able to do so much more. We'll be able to collect items, deliver items, and distribute those to all our members that are in need. So,
Congratulations.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Before I do the last one, there is in front of you Certificate of Completion of the Freedom of Access Training Required. You need to go on that website, www.maine.gov/FOAA/FAQ. You need to read through the questions. When you've done that, you need to fill this out and bring it in, and Roz will be hunting you down for it. So please take that and do that. I appreciate that. The last thing I want to do is recognize Roz Walton, the executive assistant. She is retiring. Her last day will be December 31st. As many of you may or may not know, she's the backbone of our office area, managing all of us. And for over 30 years, several superintendents. I know I'm her favorite. So she does anything, everything, from presentations to flyers to parents, difficult conversations, to secretary and their workloads and training them. And it's just endless. And I just know I couldn't be effective without her. So Roz, we want to thank you.
All right, any other communications this evening? none, let's move on to the approval of the consent agenda and the minutes from the November 20th meeting. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
And
Second.
all in favor? So moved. Motion is passed. Public participation. Could we invite anyone for public participation this evening? Seeing none, let's move on to student information.
It's just me tonight. Anna's not here, so I'll do all the talking. So Peyton Bell, which is a freshman at Edward Little, she was recently mentioned as the Sun Journal's All-Region Girls Cross Country Runner of the Year, so I thought that was really important. Olivia Jalbert from Yale also set the indoor track record for high jump this year at the indoor track meet at University of Maine. AMS is currently undergoing Spirit Week. My brother goes there, so he's been telling me all about it. ELHS Music Department held their annual December concert at the Franco Center in Lewiston, and the choir and band performed. And then lastly, Agron Appliance recently donated a new refrigerator to the ELHS pantry, and I know that that was like really useful because we really needed one badly, so I'm really like appreciative that Agron Appliance did that.
Great. Thank you, Emma. I'm going to add on to that just a little bit with student information, something I came across yesterday, that Fairview School has been accepted to participate in Winter Kids. I will let you know that you are going against one of my schools in my district. Sabatis Primary is coming for you, Fairview. And of all the schools we could have been... Right, I know. Of all the schools we could have been lined up against, I thought that was absolutely ironic. Wonderful. Anyways, stay tuned. We'll have results at the end of January on that one, I believe. Yes. All right. Moving on to superintendent's report.
You'll try to be neutral, I'm sure, Karen.
Oh, sure.
Okay, for superintendent's report, I am starting with a request. The chair asked me about the Fairview apartment complex going next to Fairview, and are we being proactive about that? And yes, we're absolutely keeping an eye on all of the housing projects going up around Auburn. And so this one in particular is a workforce development project. It's overseen by a company out of Portland, and mostly 1 to 2 bedroom, but there are several 3 bedrooms. So we are hearing that it may open in March as they work through all of the you know, how it is, building and permitting and approval and stuff. So what Celeste has been doing is watching her numbers, watching as people enroll, when it's opening. Just like with all of our schools, we look at enrollment all the time. For example, Washburn, kindergarten is full right now, so when he has a family register with kindergartners, we talk and tell the family that they may be moved to a different school, and we'll be providing transportation. So we're always looking at those numbers. I'd love to say that I know exactly what grade those students will be in when they move in, but we don't know, and the services we don't know. But the city, we communicate often about the different projects that are being done. I do sit in on the pre-planning meetings before planning boards to hear what's going on, ask questions. So they do keep us in the loop. There is an apartment project going on in the East Auburn one. That makes me probably the most nervous right now, and that's the one next to St. Dom's going in across. That is East Auburn's neighborhood, so we're going to have to keep an eye on that one. You know, we were worried about Spring Street and the impact on Walton, I believe, Sherwood Heights, and we haven't, you know, we've been able to absorb that. So we, you know, we keep an eye on our numbers. So I just want people to know we're aware of it, we're keeping an eye. Brian?
Are there any grades that we're concerned about? You know, like at certain schools, are we concerned that
Grade 5.
grade 5 is the...
Getting the grade 5 signal, yeah. So often, I mean, whenever they register, we check in to make sure, you know, does this family, can we service as enrollment, and then we work with families about it. So, yeah.
So it was my understanding that, so Fairview wasn't consulted before this project was okayed, correct?
We
If
weren't
it was-
aware. We were aware that it was in, yes, it went to the planning board, and as a matter of fact, I think when those projects were coming through, the planning board asked me, Brian, you were there, right? So I came and spoke about where the lines are and to keep an eye on enrollment, and they were very interested. Evan Sear, who chairs the planning board, he asked me for enrollment numbers for schools, how large are they built for, so they have, and Brian, you could speak to it because you're on the planning board, but they keep an eye on where the lines are, what our enrollment capacities are, and trying to work on that.
We can only plan so
But I
much
can't,
for-
no, we can't
Right.
block a project,
Exactly.
yes.
Okay.
But, Brian, did you want to comment
Well,
about that
just
from the
that
plan?
there are, with the last planning board meetings, that there were several other new locations that are coming online, being River Road, Summer Street,
Mm-hmm.
and the old Jewish Center there off of,
Yes, right in
yeah,
New
right in
Auburn.
there. So there is some new housing coming on board, and looking at future projects coming down the line.
Right. And so every year, just so people understand, like superintendent's agreements, letters go out to all families that are under superintendent's agreements that are out of district, and they always, annually, they need to resubmit those letters. And so we go through all of them, making sure, do we still have capacity, and then working with our families. So it's always on our radar. Celeste will call and say, can you check in with the housing? When do they start? That's something that is a challenge in the city. They are aware, but we need housing, so it's kind of a double-edged sword, but we'll keep an eye on it. So that's my update for that question. So our first agenda item is Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Subcommittee. So as I made you aware, and some of you were in the audience at the time, so you probably heard this, but when we were talking about Steve Wessler's work, we wanted to not just have only Steve Wessler doing work, but we wanted to work with other consultants, especially around different topics that Steve doesn't necessarily focus on. So I had been working behind the scenes with Virginia Durrani, good, and Laura Ligori, and they're going to introduce themselves and what they represent. And then Karen, Matthew, and I, and Scott Anier had a meeting with them. And then we had a recent meeting on a proposal. What could they do for us moving forward? And really a focal point on subcommittee. How do we form? What are we going to look at research? And they're going to talk about this. And I wrote it in your superintendent's update that we do have Title IV funds. So Doris is aware of the proposal. I sent it to her and said, could you start working on this if the school committee gives the thumbs up to have our Title IV funds allocated towards at least Phase 1 and Phase 2. And then we'll have to talk more about the other phases. But they're here to talk about their work and get a thumbs up for you, from all of you, that Karen and I continue to work with them. So I turn it over to you. Welcome.
Hey, everyone. I'll be going back and forth just to honor all of the folks here. I'm going to start. So my name's Virginia Durrani, and it is great to be here with all of you tonight. I am a resident of Auburn. My family moved here a couple of years ago, and I have two young children in the schools, a 5 and a 7-year-old at Park Avenue. So my children are just starting the journey of education here in Auburn. I also am a teacher or instructor at the University of Maine, Farmington. I teach in the early childhood and elementary ed programs. And I am an adjunct faculty at CMCC, locally here. And my predominant work in education for many, many years is cultural responsive pedagogy and social emotional learning. How do we create inclusive classrooms, starting with the little people? So I start very young with 4-year-olds. And have dialogues while preparing them for all of the different learning that goes into reading and math and writing. How do we also talk about who we are and where we come from, and why I have this amount of melanin in me and you have more, and where our ancestors come from and the languages we speak, and all aspects of difference and identity into the classroom, weave it into the curriculum, and have dialogues from the start, and give teachers the tools to create inclusive classrooms where we're having these dialogues while also learning about everything else that school embodies learning. And it's, I love preparing teachers to do that, and I travel around the state and in other places, and have gone to the Middle East, working in places where having these dialogues are a lot more complicated when working in conflictual communities. So a lot of my focus is a lot of that social emotional and our impacts of our journeys, our stories, how trauma may have been informed by it, living on the margins, and how do we stay strong in who we are, understand the others in our community, as well as learning how to just read and write and do well on the next test that's coming around the corner. So that's a lot of my focus and area of expertise in education. I'm going to let Laura share a little bit about her, and then we will kind of do a brief summary around the proposal so you have a better sense as to what our hopes are for Auburn.
Hi, everybody. Yay, this is fun. Yeah, I'm clearly going to do the back and forth as well with everyone. Yeah, so my name's Laura Ligori. I'm a cognitive scientist, so that means that I work at the intersection of psychology and neuroscience. So I am about 3.5 years into Maine. I was from Boston previously, where I worked at the Sachs Lab for Social Cognitive Neuroscience at MIT. And I was part of groups there who wanted to understand, with everything that happens in terms of conflict and learning, all of our dimensions of diversity, and we'll get into that in a second, we have one thing in common worldwide, and that's our brains. So we tended to take a look at research focused on how our brains give rise to violent conflict between groups. And we weren't just interested in understanding more about the brain for the brain's sake, but we were learning about the brain so that we could ultimately create better programming and better interventions that were more effective on the ground with whatever NGO or organization or school we were working with at the time. So it was very, very applied. And when I moved to Maine, I established MindBridge. So I'm the executive director of MindBridge. We're an NGO that uses psychology and neuroscience to support human rights. Within MindBridge, we have a program called the Implicit Bias Project. And the Implicit Bias Project takes decades and decades of psychological and neurobiological research and uses that to mitigate bias, racism, and discrimination. So the idea is data-driven design to create better, more pro-social environments. Within the Implicit Bias Project, I get to travel all over the place, which is really fun. So I get to travel to all sorts of different countries and different locations and work with different schools. I also had the benefit of working with UNESCO's International Bureau of Education on their Universal Understanding Guide, which was an effort to kind of reestablish the way we're approaching learning within UNESCO schools. They were particularly interested in the social emotional brain and how our brain, social emotional brain, helps us with learning cognition. The social emotional brain also is the center of how we not only understand what we're learning, but how we understand each other. So how do these parts of our brain that relates to how I relate to you and to someone else and someone else that might be different from me, how do those parts of the brain also help us learn cognition over time? So all these things are kind of jumbled in together, and so this is a big part of what we're going to be looking at with the proposal we'll talk to you about in a moment. With our work with MindBridge, we have two really important aspects to our work that I think is important to say here, and part of why I'm here as well. So I really believe in data. I really believe in research. I don't believe in just kind of starting a project for a project's sake. I think that if you're going to do anything, there needs to be some real research behind it and real knowledge as to why you're doing it and the direction that you're going. So that's a really important part of MindBridge and the way that we work. We also truly believe in community-based approaches. So I work a lot with international communities, and so all of MindBridge's research is based in partnered collaboration. So if we have any sort of project, the idea is that we have that community present at the table, that we're going to work with them to co-create whatever it is that we're doing. It ultimately makes for better science and more effective programming. So that's us, and that's a lot. And if you have questions, I welcome that, and let me know, and you can talk to me afterwards as well. I'm going to hang out for a while. But next, I want to talk to you about the project and kind of our overarching goals of the project. So we have two overarching goals for this project. And that's to create a full encompassing plan for diversity, equity, inclusion within Auburn School District that not only is a full encompassing plan for diversity, equity, inclusion, but that fully incorporates the community as part of that process. So we view diversity, equity, inclusion not as a one-off project or workshop or seminar, but as cultural practice. In order to truly create diversity, equity, and inclusion within school systems and really any organization, it needs to fundamentally be integrated into your culture. So it needs to become cultural practice to create stronger schools and stronger communities. So we loosely tend to define diversity as difference, but we might better understand that as the way that we gain in understanding and respect of the ways that we are individually unique. So we tend to think of that in terms of race, ethnicity. We might think of that as gender identity, sexual orientation, age. We can also think of that in terms of income or poverty and mental health. So all of the different ways that we may be unique within of ourselves and between each other. So for us, this project is to incorporate all of these layers of diversity to ultimately strengthen the teachers, the students, the family, and community together. So that's the idea, and the proposal that we've put forward is in 4 phases over about a year and a half. So I will turn that over to Virginia, and I will jot down notes here because it's a lot. There's a lot of different components that are part of this, but I'm going to try to distill that out into an outline to help us understand all these different components. Cool?
Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through the brief phases of phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I know we've mentioned, in terms of the focus really on that phase 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4 is really a work in progress, but I think it's important to at least lay out the vision of what we all have discussed. So the first phase is first, I have partnered with a Bates student who is a psychology student who's also working with education professors who came to me who was wanting to do her research on topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the school system. She was familiar with some of my work. She knew I was in the field in different ways, came to me and was like, can I do my honors thesis with you? And so I have worked with her to develop her honors thesis that really helps to establish this phase 1, which is not only going to be supervised by myself, but also a psychology professor and an education professor at Bates, where her work is to do the research around what have other districts nationally done around these topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are talking about a really big topic that every school district across the nation has all been kind of faced with. How do we address and respond? And so her work is to first do the research, and we've identified some key districts, some in Maine, in terms of demographics that are similar to us within Maine, as well as looking at in areas of Minnesota and Minneapolis and places where there was a lot of very new influx of communities coming in and how that has evolved, as well as in Boston because of the location in terms of near us and a lot of their education philosophy, which was some of it similar within the state of Maine. We were making some connections around some districts in the Boston area. So she's kind of identified some key districts, key areas to kind of ask and do some interview questions and research around how do they respond and what are the models that they have developed. It's really important to me as a person in the community and knowing best practice that a model for Auburn isn't necessarily going to be the same model that we would see maybe in Portland or even in Bangor or even in Lewiston right next door, because every community is unique in and of itself, and it's really important that the community is involved in the development of what that model looks like. But at the same time, it's important to look at research of what other communities are doing so that we don't necessarily have to reinvent a whole wheel if there's something that's working that is similar that we like. So her research is to really identify, do the interviewing, write her research around that, and then to come up with, these are some of the options that we have seen play out in these districts. Some who've maybe developed a coalition that has a subcommittee off of the school board. Some who've developed an office that has put funding in to have an individual who is the diversity equity officer, who is the one who maintains and holds a lot of that container. There's all these different ways and how that gets implemented and how resources get distributed is all part of her research. So her goal in the first couple of months of this year is to gather that research, not only through interviewing people from the districts, but also for us to do a landscape analysis of Auburn and to identify key stakeholders who we want to bring together intentionally in the form of like listening circles to get their opinions on diversity, equity, and inclusion within this area. So what do we see happening in this community? What do we want to see happen in this community? As well as what are other districts doing nationally? Bring that research together that is her charge to do as an honors thesis student, and then come up with some proposals that the school committee would then agree upon. This is the direction we want to go on, which we are seeing happen maybe in like the April time period, roughly. So that's kind of one of the big first phases, is identifying the landscape of stakeholders in this area. Who are those players and who are the individuals that we think is really important? And it's also important to have people from all walks and places in the roles they play. Parents, teachers, administrators, school board members, and even, student ambassadors. What are these different perspectives on these topics? And intentionally bringing different people together to have these mini dialogues that we would gather and put together in a formal that we would then adopt, or the school committee would adopt, as this is the direction we want to move forward on addressing these topics. And that final piece within that MindBridge does, thank you, is an equity audit. So while Sam, the Bates student, is doing her thesis and research, and I'm supervising her in all of those areas, MindBridge has this very formal process that they go through to identify, that they call an equity audit, to see what are already we doing as a school district that's addressing these issues. What are we already doing well? Where are there gaps? What does that look like? So whatever model we define and discuss, like we choose we want to do, this audit will also help inform the work that we say we want to do in the district. Okay, so that's the final piece of phase one. You want me to stop for questions, or just people keep good?
I do have one question.
Yeah.
Now, the listening circles, how do you plan on facilitating that? Because we have had issues with that in the past, and I don't want to do the same thing. I want to be really cognizant of how we're doing this, and
absolutely.
So that's my question.
So we haven't fleshed out the specifics around it. The idea was, I know in the past, like the community circles, so we talked about maybe having them in the different wards. Identifying the stakeholders would be various people at the table identifying who would be good stakeholders to have involved in that piece. So again, from all different places, and then having facilitators who are very trained in knowing how to have a dialogue that is, responding to any concerns with clear goals and boundaries and agreements to what the dialogue is about. So trained facilitators with key people who are very involved in identifying who the stakeholders are, and doing it across the city where everyone feels like they are involved and representation is happening across the city. I don't know if you want to add more specific.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that we try to learn from our past, right? So listening about what were the challenges with that one too, so we don't replicate it. There are several different types of facilitation models that can be used. I know MindBridge has a specific style that we use, but we could go through the different models with interested parties and see which one might be the best fit for Auburn. But I think regardless of whatever model we ultimately choose that might be the best fit, what Virginia said is really right on, that you always come with agreements and guidelines and facilitation techniques for that, to try to create as safe of an environment as possible to really hold all the things that need to be said.
Okay.
Does that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll add, that's why we're recommending a subcommittee to have 2 board members on, working with them to give feedback on the listening circle or the different phases. So that's why having that connection with the board in a subcommittee to just keep those eyes out and giving feedback is important.
Yes, so definitely that part of that process to inform the work from that point on. Okay, so phase 2 then. So phase 2, I would say the biggest piece around that is after Sam has done her research, is kind of coming up with these are various models, and then the school committee with the public kind of deciding and saying, after a presentation of this is what this looks like, this is what we could do, this is what we could do. Do you want to adopt one of these, or do you want to merge and make it unique of we like this of this or this of this? But it's really the adoption and the development of what model we choose, whether it is a committee, whether it is a staff person, part of the school district, whether it is a subcommittee of the school board, whatever that is. I don't want to define it because part of this research is to look at it all, but that second phase is to come to the definition of what that is after everyone has had the opportunity to see the research. Once that kind of model piece is kind of adopted in whatever format, it's then kind of putting the structure together of, okay, if this is going to be a committee of these people, who are these people? What are the seats that we're trying to make sure are represented, and who are the people going to be involved? So it gets into the specifics of the definition of how that model is going to look, but we can't get there until we decide what kind of model we want to approach. So phase 2 is that. The other part of phase 2, it was really important, I think, in a lot of ways for Laura and I to first, for me, before we can think about action, it is about doing reflection, which is really important for me in saying, how do we first listen to what people are wanting and needing before we start going into action and development or moving forward? With that being said, I, as a member of this community, have been actively listening a lot and know that, especially at the Edward Little High School, that students especially have really been asking for more support and tools and dialogue for their teachers, as well as, maybe in whatever way that looks within the school. And so we were ready to pause on any kind of professional development, but felt it was really important that as people were asking for having some beginning dialogues, how do we start in that process? So part of phase 2 is to also do a first initial training with the Edward Little staff. Laura and I had the opportunity to meet with the leadership team to share a little bit about who we are and to gather what they want from this all-day training, which we made it really clear was a baby step, beginning step. And everyone agreed that that was a good way, that really half of the day of the training is listening, is doing some space to reflect on how things are going and what direction do we want to go in and where do we need to learn from whatever mistakes, and a genuine opportunity of space to listen. And then the second half of that day is starting to do some of the implicit bias training that MindBridge does. From that point on, any further professional development we felt like would only unfold organically as the DEI model develops, because that group is really the one that should be defining what the PD should be for the rest of the district, because it's a committee of people saying, this is what we want for the middle school, this is what we want for the elementary, this is what we want for the high, and a variety of people offering their input. So the professional development, really, we looked at starting later in the phases, but we wanted to start this process out with Edward Little, considering a lot of the recommendations and the requests that the staff and students were wanting, and we felt it was important to respond to that immediately and to start having that dialogue. So that is set for January for that part. So that's the other big piece of phase 2. Any other piece finish? Any questions on phase 2? People? Okay. So phase 3 is, I would say, predominantly, we looked at, so if we're looking at those pieces in terms of the spring, I would say is predominantly like a summertime piece, which also, whatever model this group and committee decides, I also saw as whatever model, meaning whatever individuals who create this DEI group, would also hopefully be involved in the process of the hiring of a new superintendent, at least being involved on some level in that process, which means any kind of action steps in terms of what are the goals of the DEI group or person, what are the next action steps, really would happen within the summertime once new leadership is involved, because that new leadership really should be working in partnership with this group of people who are coming from the school board. So for me, it's the community is driving what we want, with at the same time looking to a leader to help facilitate what we want, if that makes sense. So therefore, we're laying this foundation through research and ideas of what we as a district want, with then the intention of looking for who are the candidates who are going to come supporting the work that we want and what are the skills that they bring. So then in the summer, whoever it is that comes through those doors is aware of this is already a work in progress. They're hopefully just going to be involved in the leadership to implement and support a work in progress that the community has defined, if that makes sense. So phase 3 is really the development of the actual formal goals of the DEI group and how they want to lay that out for the upcoming school year. More intentionally. What action steps will the DEI group take? And because diversity, equity, and inclusion encompasses a lot of components, it, for me, encompasses looking at our curriculum, looking at how all of our approaches of assessments that we have done, looking at the professional development that teachers have, looking at the opportunities and activities that students do, looking at places and gaps of students on the margins and how we can best support them. Many things get fallen under DEI, and therefore it's really important that the committee is very intentional around thinking, what are the action steps that we want to take to look at all of these different challenges and opportunities in a very intentional, integral way. That's where, for me, it's a cultural shift and a cultural practice. Because if we're saying this is our values around this, then how do we actually implement that and walk it versus just saying this is something we want to do? And how we walk it is different for many different people. So it's really important for us to sit down and listen to those diverse perspectives around how we want to do that. And it's really important for me of starting as young as possible with the little people and moving all the way up through. So that summertime is the planning around that. Anything else? Any questions around that? All right, so the final phase 4 that we put out, but again, this really comes to the hands of the folks who are sitting at the table and the leadership, but we just put out as to what would be then best practice is, as we are saying, we're starting out professional development for Edward Little student, teachers and staff. How do we want to continue that depending on what they want, and how do you ripple that down across all the schools within the district? Because for me, it's really also really important if you're going to engage in a cultural practice, then everyone within the district needs to feel like they're involved and at the table and a part of the process. And therefore, what does that look like, and how do we get the different schools involved? What is the support of the teachers that they each need to provide them those tools that they want to address in the classroom? And that, for me, is where that takes that extra year of support, working with each school, knowing each school's culture is different, but really making sure that all the teachers and everyone's really communicating the same language and the same values across the district. So how a school may implement it from one school to another may be a little different in the type of training they need or do, but we're all speaking the same values of this is what is important to us as a district around the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that would be the over year of saying these are the type of trainings, developing maybe student ambassador programs, or working with the current civil rights teams in a different way, where their approach is looking at this through this lens that we've decided. But it's taking the time of listening to all the voices and all the perspectives, and continuing to organically let the process unfold around how trainings may happen, or conversations, or more listening circles. It's really to let the community develop that, and using that upcoming year to kind of see how that unfolds. So we put out a draft proposal of what that could look like based on the types of trainings we said we could do, but that really, it couldn't be determined until these other phases happened, because other voices need to be involved in the process. Anything else? All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any questions for them? Absolutely.
For Katie, actually.
Yes.
I'm just curious, what precipitated the need for this?
So part of it was starting last year when we talked about with Steve Wessler. And so then coming into this school year, and I heard about Laura Liguori had done a presentation over in Lewiston and came recommended, and then talking to Virginia about things as a parent and as a professor that really is passionate about this, with the Boston Globe article, with things that were coming up in the community, and really wanting to have our schools be safe places for all our students and staff. It was, how do we best do this in a thoughtful, planned way? And that's why I really commend them for, talking to us about step back, let's start fresh, let's really be thoughtful, let's bring in a Bates person that can really do the research for us, give us some models, and then design it. It can be as big as you want, it can be as small as you want. So we're taking their expertise. They've done this in other districts. They've done it small, like one school doing it. They've done it where it's one district. It's been town and the district. So this is something for you to consider, and it's really in its infancy, because you may come in March as a subcommittee and say, well, this is what we want to recommend as our next step. So this is a proposal, and they've been very flexible about what is your needs, and let's go from that. And when we met with, when we were doing Steve Westler's work, he really talked about the implicit bias work and getting some training on that. And so that's how it kind of came together. You know, it's just, it's important work, and it's safe school work is important, has always been in the Auburn School Department, reading our Vision 2030. So it's just the next step that we're recommending.
Any other questions? So at this time, the question before the school committee is to propose an amendment to support the, to support the proposal as presented and to create a diversity, equity, and inclusion school committee subcommittee to begin some of the work. But this time, do we have a motion to
I motion.
propose? Speak nice and loudly.
So moved.
Second?
A second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of creating a subcommittee for DEI, for the work of DEI? Opposed? Any abstentions? I think Dave just abstained. All right, motion's approved.
Yeah, okay, so, and you'll see, we're going to talk more about subcommittees later, so, yeah. So, Karen, you're going to do the election of the vice chair.
Absolutely. So at this time, we are needing to elect a vice chair, someone who will fulfill the roles of the chair should the chair no longer be able to sit in this role. So at this time, anyone have any nominations they would like to present for vice chair? Taking names.
I'll nominate Dave.
Dave, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Any other nominations at this time? All right, seeing no other nominations, let's vote. All those in favor for Dave Simpson as co-chair of the Auburn School Committee? Any abstain?
No, it wasn't unanimous.
Motion's passed. Dave Simpson, you have been elected as vice chair of the Auburn School Committee. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
So Karen will make sure when she's on vacation or something, that you and I will meet to cover that. The next item is the financial report, and we did have a finance meeting where Faith Fontaine was, Bonnie Hayes, Adam Hansen, Jackie Smith, and myself went through, and so Faith, you're going to report out.
And
Who did I miss?
the community member, why can't Francois?
Oh, yeah, Francois, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
So we met, was it last week, right?
Yes.
And went over the lines of the budget, and a couple lines that we're keeping a close eye on are the Franklin tuition. And it's important to note that historically, Lewiston's always paid for 17 students, and or was it last year they started doing per student?
For several years, they paid for 17
Right,
tuition
but is this the
slots.
first year that they're only
This
paying
is
for
the first
okay.
year that that's changed.
So this is the first year that they are paying for the number of students. So we used to always get monies for 17 students, even if we had 9 or if we had 18. And we're at 13 students this year, so we are watching that line because we're just learning how to balance that line because things have changed. The other, we're always watching special ed. That's always a keen line to watch. We are also, and overall, we look okay. Adam is watching that extremely closely, and we may be short, but not catastrophically short. The other lines that we are, just to note, the workman's comp, which is at the 0%, that's a one-time payment to the city, and it's always the same dollar amount. Overtime transportation, as we all know, there's been a bus driver shortage. We're happy to hear that we've hired 2 new bus drivers, and we have a 3rd one taking the test. Has that one taken the test in the past? Oh, no, okay, so we've hired 2, and we're looking for 3 more.
Yeah, and I mean, we're going to help support that person because it was, as we read through the manual, we had to review a couple of things, and so making sure the driver is successful in the nest.
But 2 is
Just like
better
we
than
do
none.
with everyone.
2 is better than none, and so that line is over because we've had a shortage, so people have gone into overtime.
Faith, on that note, if I can just put in a plug, we will train people. If people
Oh, absolutely.
would like to come
Yeah.
drive, we will provide
Come
training.
and we
So
will
I'll
make
say
you the
that
best
any chance
driver.
I get.
Right,
Okay,
exactly.
perfect. Our insurance did go up because of the new buses we added. Let's see. I think those were the main ones to add. Adam, do you want to note anything else?
No, I have nothing on the finance report. The other topic we talked about was the solar energy
Oh, yes.
opportunity, the RFP that's gone out. And so you are scheduled to hear from Charlie Agnew from CES, which is the company that did the RFP on January 8th. And then as of right now, we're hoping to talk some more about it on January 22nd and have a vote. So look for more information on that in the coming weeks.
Any questions on the financial?
I just had a question on the insurance.
So yes, that I said was, yeah, because we added the buses, so
Okay.
our insurance rate went up.
Okay, okay. Thank you. In general, looks like we're in pretty good shape and not, I know there are school districts that are freezing right now, but overall, we're
Overall, we look good, yes.
financial shape?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Great.
But we'll continue to watch it.
Okay. Have a
Yeah, we'll
motion-
keep you posted every month on the special ed tuition situation, for sure.
Motion to approve the financial report for November 2018.
So moved.
Second? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's passed. Thank you.
The next item is continuation of new superintendent search. So you heard from Maine School Management. Michelle McClellan and Adam Hansen have also been doing some other research, so they're going to share.
Good enough. So yes, as we've heard tonight, the superintendent search is a task that will be taking time and attention of the school committee over the next several months. In order to help the timeliness of that process, Adam and I have been seeking information that will help you in making those first important decisions that need to be made, namely around identifying a process that you want to use to move this forward. So we want to share some of that information with you tonight, and what I did was I quickly made a handout. You're hearing about this, some of you, for the first time, I would guess, and it just might be important to have something to kind of hang the new information on. So what you'll see coming around right now is just a very simple handout about the superintendent search and the hiring process as you begin to conceptualize the process and flesh it out. So on the left side, you see a column that says steps to hiring. Those are the steps you heard Eileen refer to when she was talking about, for an example, services that MSMA could provide to assist in the search. So you can see developing that superintendent profile, advertising, reviewing, interviewing, selecting, and then offering and negotiating. Those would be things that you would be doing as a board, as a committee, to move through the process. And then a couple of questions on the right-hand side that just help frame the process. Again, big picture, we're in the big picture part of this discussion. What components will make up the process? And again, if we think of what Eileen talked to us about, she gave some examples of things you could choose: forums and surveys, or surveys, how you want that to look. So we'll have that conversation. Who should be involved and how the people should be involved in the search, and then what formats the committee wants to utilize to gather information needed to secure the best candidate. Okay? So again, this is just something to help as we begin this conversation of what this is all going to look like. So we want to share with you because tonight we need some feedback from you so that when we go into the January meeting, and I think that date is still getting a little fleshed out on when that will be?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll talk about that at the calendar.
Yes. Okay. When we go over to the January meeting to talk about this more in depth, that if there's any information we want to make sure we have for that conversation as we go deeper, Adam and I or whomever can have that ready and available for you. Okay, so we heard from MSMA tonight, briefly. Adam is going to share a bit about a conversation that we had about the process in Lewiston.
Yeah, so just to, do a little research, what have other communities done? Obviously, our sister community just went through this process in finding a new superintendent. So we spoke with Bobby Avery, who's their chief administrative officer, to get a sense of how that worked. Did they use a consultant, et cetera? So we talked, Michelle and I met with her. They did use a consultant by the name of BWP, which is a firm from Illinois. And they did do a national search, and that consulting firm did find a person from this region to help with that. The first thing they did was a lot of what Eileen talked about, setting the, backing into the timeline and then setting the goals and the steps and what would that look like. So they decided that they wanted to advertise on October 1st, so that's what they did. They had a 2-month application window, and BWP did a lot of the work that Eileen talked about. They did a survey, they did one-on-one interviews with the board members, they held focus groups, and then they reached out to various stakeholders in the community to make sure they hadn't left anybody out. The consultant handled the application reviewing and screening. Probably one of the differences that we noted between this and MSMA is once they had identified what the board was looking for, they narrowed down the list to the candidates that seemed to meet that criteria and presented that narrowed down list to the committee for their consideration. Whereas with MSMA, you see all of the applicants. That was one difference that we noted. So the bulk of their work was in that phase. But there was a lot of work done by Bobby and the staff at Lewiston. So just to give you a sense, we found out that between the services and the advertising that was done with BWP, it was about $25,000. And then there was travel expense on top of that. So that's just to give you a sense of one other alternative that's out there that did work with Lewiston. Of course, there are many other consultants out there as well. So Michelle and I are ready to assist in whatever way we can once we have some direction from you.
I was just curious, do you know how many applicants Lewiston got?
I want to say it was, 16.
Oh, okay.
So right around what
they
Eileen
okay.
had mentioned, in maybe 15.
They narrowed, BWP narrowed that down to 6, I believe it was, or somewhere around there that the committee saw. Right. So there were 16 applicants, and then it got narrowed down.
Did they state why they went with this particular firm, why they felt this one was a good match for them?
I know that this firm had done Portland's search, and so I think that's why the Lewiston board wanted to hear from them. And they obviously liked what they heard, and they decided to use them.
Okay. Any other questions?
Are we able to interview different entities like BWP and other?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I did, again, just trying to, in the interest of time, I reached out to BWP to see if they would be available to come present to you if you wanted to go that route. They said they would be able to present electronically January 15th or in person January 22nd, if you would like that.
At whose expense? They're in Illinois, at our expense to have them come here to speak to us, or at their expense to come here to speak to us?
I believe that would be at their expense. If it's not, they didn't mention that, but they'd be selling themselves to you, so I assume it would be at their expense.
Could always include that in the evening or the time that we set aside to talk about this. We could do something electronically as well.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The next agenda item is subcommittee appointments. So in your packet were the list of subcommittees and standing committees. So per policy, the two standing committees are the Policy Committee and the Finance Committee. Those are dictated in policy. The other ones are ones that we've had that are supported because, like CLC, the Community Learning Centers grants require a school committee member. The Share Center encourages a member. So there are different reasons why you're being asked to be on these subcommittees, and also to have your voice heard and you being able to communicate out to the public and to the board members. So I'll just quickly go through them. And then Karen will explain what she would like you to do in response. But there's the Audit Committee, which Faith has served on, and that one meets periodically when the audit's being done, so it's more of an annual commitment. The Community Learning Center, that meets 2 to 3 times a year, and Karen Millard oversees that. So that has a minimal time commitment. Curriculum Committee is facilitated by Shelley Mogul, and that one meets when there's a textbook selection needed, and so they are working on a textbook or program selection for the middle school in mathematics, so I know she will be bringing this committee together to discuss that. The Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, which you just gave your thumbs up to, and so we will probably assign a staff member to that committee once we know who the members are. Then we have the Finance Committee that meets monthly. So you can see that Adam Hansen oversees that with Jackie Smith, our business office manager. And so that is a monthly commitment. Negotiations is probably, this is a big one because it is a time commitment. We are negotiating food service contract this spring as they are due for their current contract expires in August 31st, 2020, and then next year there are 3 contracts that need to be negotiated, and then the teacher's contract will be the following year. So this is a commitment that you really need to think a lot about. And then we have the new ELHS Building Committee. I know Karen has already said that she will be one of the members, as that has been the role of the chair to help facilitate the new ELHS Building Committee, so I know she's looking for one member there. And then Parent Advisory, 1 or 2 members, because I think Pat, so 2 members there, yeah. And then the Parent Advisory, I know Brian has been attending those when he's been able to, so I know Sue Doris and Michelle McClellan really would like to have commitment from a couple board members to be on that. The Policy Committee, which Michelle oversees, a lot of it has been done electronically, but she is open, and I know we've talked about when could those meetings occur in a way that would be advantageous to members. The Share Center Board, you can see they meet the first Tuesday of every month, and then you report out what their work is. The new superintendent search, we're recommending a subcommittee work on this. Michelle and Adam certainly can help support, but there probably should be a couple school board members, helping with that behind the scenes work, and then what to do next. Transportation Appeals Committee, which Dan has done, that is really, that's part of policy that when a parent may get a denial, they can take it to the Transportation Appeals Committee where the final decision is. A lot of that, the Director of Support Services and the Transportation Dispatcher and myself work a lot behind the scenes on that. So when it gets to this level, it really, we've exhausted the decision. Then we have the Wellness Committee, which Faith, you've been serving on, and that Mike Davis oversees, and that meets monthly. And once he knows who the board members are, you'll get notification regarding when those committees work. So those are the committees that we're asking for school board membership. And Karen, you're going to explain what.
So at this point, in all the policies that I'm reading, it says the board, the chair appoints. However, knowing you know yourselves better than I do, so knowing your strengths, knowing your talents and what you can bring to each one of these committees, I would like for you to really take a good hard look at all these committees, understand the time that is being asked for you, and to think about at least 2 committees that you can commit to serving to. There are 8 of us and several committees. So if you could notify me, I would say a certain date by the next meeting to let me know which committees you would like to serve on. Sound good? Or if you have any questions.
I do.
Yes.
What is the parent advisory subcommittee? What's their function?
It's not really, that's not a subcommittee, that's the parent advisory that's been occurring, that have already been occurring. It would be that a board member will attend the parent advisory. It's not a subcommittee.
Oh, okay.
You would just be in attendance so you could report out how the parent advisory. Good question, though.
Thank you.
And I put January 15th, it's really January 8th will be the appointments. So on the 8th, there will be an agenda item where Karen's going to say, here's where I've appointed each of you and which committees, and then you'll approve those. That's giving the authority, the board authority for those members to serve on those committees. So like the new superintendent search, as soon as Karen knows who she's going to appoint to that, she'll let Michelle and Adam know so that you can start planning that. So as soon as you give her, everybody chimes in, then Karen can make the decisions.
Or you will be appointed.
Or you'll be appointed, right? Don't make eye contact with her that night. Right. So that's for January. So if you can do that in the next couple weeks.
I would say definitely, in my mind, I would think definitely by January 1st, you should have some idea as to which subcommittees you would like to be volunteering on. So if you could let me know, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
The last item is the calendar. I try to give a calendar out, and, it says draft for a reason, because it's always subject to change. But this is kind of in general terms so that you can start putting these in your calendar. You know when you're due where, what time. We often sometimes add workshops, so even though it doesn't say a workshop, if Karen and I do planning. So she and I have planned to meet every week in order to check in about the meetings and plan for the next meeting. I'm seeing a lot of snow coming down, so if people in the audience, you may want to think about that. Sorry, I'm a snow, as Karen knows, I have a snow thing, and it is coming down. All right, so refocus again. Yes, breathe. So the
No buses on the road.
no buses on the road, so I can breathe.
Okay.
Yes. So here's some dates. Because January is an awkward month, because of the first being a holiday, the first Wednesday, you will have regular meetings on the second and fourth meeting. So January 8th, you are due for a regular meeting. As you heard, you're going to get information about the solar energy savings opportunity, and you'll have the subcommittee appointments. And if there's anything else between now and then, we'll put on there. Then January 11th, we're planning a retreat from 8 to 2. And we have met on the what that information is going to look like. It's all the things that you're going to be diving into: budgets around technology, support services, curriculum, all the different things that you need to know about student supports, student achievement, truancy. Yeah,
Presentation coming up.
yeah, on January 22nd. Yeah, so retreat planning, we'll be working on that. Then January 15th is a workshop, and so whether you have a group come in and talk to you about it, that will be the evening for that. Then on the 22nd will be a regular meeting. You will note at 6 o'clock there will be a public information evening, and we are going to hold it here. So that will give an update on the new ELHS project for the public to attend, to hear Mark Lee and Lisa Sawan update, and subcommittee representatives to update information. That'll be an hour before the regular meeting. And then on the regular meeting on the 22nd, you're going to hear from school attorney around the solar energy savings opportunity, because Drummond and Woodsman is working with towns and school departments that are looking at joining this RFP. And so they're going to talk about what the contract looks like, what are the pros and cons, and you're going to have some legal counsel on that. And then the finance report, and as you mentioned, Michelle is going to go over truancy laws, because one of the components of the truancy law is to be notified, the school committee be notified when a student has reached the level to have the notification. So we want to make sure you have information, and then she'll be notifying you of students. Then we have bookmark January 29th for more superintendent search discussions. Then February 5th is a budget kickoff, and so you'll be provided with detailed budget notebooks, hopefully on the 5th, and we'll do some goal setting and budget overview, and then you can see another bookmark on the 12th for the search, and then on the 26th, we'll get into cost centers, and so we'll go cost center by cost center. As you can see, February 26th, March 4th, March 11th, March 18th, and you also see on March 18th, the first reading of the probably school committee calendar first reading will be March 4th, and then the calendar approval for March 18th. There's a public hearing, and then we have to go to city council for their approval, so you'll see all the dates and then what's coming up. This calendar went to the city manager, who is going to work with the mayor on when would there be some additional joint meetings with city council. So we do need to have some other joint meetings, but they did not have an opportunity to give dates or have a discussion with adding dates. Or are they going to come to one of our workshops, or are we going to a Monday night meeting? So there's still work in progress, but I wanted to let you at least start putting these in your book.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, our next meeting coming up will be January 8th, regular meeting at 7 o'clock. At this time, we are not entering into executive session. So I would like to thank you all for your first formal meeting, sitting in as Auburn School Committee members. And at this time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.